Good morning, dear ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, our colleagues, researchers who are willing to participate in scientific events of Researchers Excellence Network. It's our pleasure to have today a virtual lecture which will be given by Professor from Germany, Professor Irma Rybnikova. And today we are going to talk about very hot issue in nowadays good governance concept. It's the leadership in local governments. Uh, I would like to remind that all participants who are connecting our event virtually has the possibility to give some questions for our presenter in the chat line. So please prepare your questions in writing. And at the same time, I would like to remind for all participants in this audience that you have the possibility to ask eye-to-eye questions to our professor and to use this possibility to make some nice discussions. So let us present you Professor Irma Rybnikova. She has more than 15 years of experience in the field of human resources management and organizational studies. So it's our honor today to have you, Professor, in this audience and for this public lecture. So please come, the floor is yours.
Good morning. So why to talk about leadership dilemmas and leadership paradoxes? It's, I would say it's a topic which is quite understudied and under-researched until now, since leadership or leadership processes are considered mainly as something very easy, very straightforward, with leaders being controllers and being decision makers and followers being just people who are implementing these decisions. But dilemmas, leadership dilemmas and leadership paradoxes highlight that leadership processes are by no way so easy. They are quite complex, with leaders being challenged by many different contradictions and tensions. And today I would like to look together with you at some contradictions and tensions leaders in public sector organizations, especially in municipalities, are challenged by. And the agenda of my presentation today begins with introduction, just short overview, why we are doing this research. By the way, I'm on one researcher of our research group, with Rita Tolekiene being the second researcher and Reinhard Lang, the third one, my colleague from Germany. So we have an international research group, and we have also empirical results, and since several years we are trying to discuss about these complicated and quite complex topics. So after introduction, I will give you a short overview on theoretical background and the current state of discussion in terms of leadership dilemmas, and also current research on public sector leadership. Then I will briefly present our theoretical assumptions which grounded and founded our empirical study. Afterwards, just few ideas regarding our method and methodology in our empirical investigation, and then I will present our main findings in terms of specific leadership dilemmas in public administrations, namely in municipalities. And I will end with some discussion and conclusions in terms of what we have learned. Leadership dilemma as a topic is quite understudied. I have tried to underline that leadership dilemma in public sector organizations are understudied almost completely. And our contribution and my presentation deals now with these two topics intersected. What kind of leadership dilemmas can be observed in public sector organizations, especially in municipalities? And I and we hope that this represents on one side, conceptual contribution, on the other side also an empirical contribution, since we have results which stem from Germany and from Lithuania, from two countries dealing with these different leadership processes. Now, what is about leadership dilemmas? Even if this is understudied topic, there are some, though few concepts and ideas regarding this. Beginning with a main idea on leadership. What is leadership? Altogether, leadership is a kind of process of influence where one individual leader is trying to influence another individuals, which are called followers or just employees. And their idea that this influencing, the process of influence, is really inherently related to different dilemmas is quite old, with Selesnik being one of the first authors looking at, or at least saying that there are different dilemmas which are quite challenging for leaders. Since I have used both words in my topic, paradoxes and dilemmas, I thought it would be helpful for all of us to define these two topics. Paradoxes are quite are becoming quite modern and quite interesting research topic, especially in organizational studies and organizational research, but not in leadership studies. It's really quite interesting to look at social sciences considering with organizations and to see that there are so different strands in traditions in researching organizations, leadership studies being quite separated, quite different from organization studies. We see that paradoxes is very fashionable topic now in organization studies, which it means that organizational scholars are increasingly considered with contradictory yet interrelated elements that exist simultaneously and persist over time in organizations. So they look at contradictions and look at these tensions which are caused by these contradictions in organizations. And dilemmas are much more topic of leadership studies, which are, so to say, results of these paradoxes. Dilemmas are, as I have wrote here, are critical situations in which the actors are confronted with at least two, even more, undesirable or unfavorable behavior options. It means, in case of a dilemma, neither leader nor employee nor follower has an idea what is right behavior. Neither the one option is really good and effective, nor the another. This is a dilemmatic situation which does not have really easy solutions. It's really quite challenging to deal with these dilemmas. And in this presentation, I will look at leadership dilemmas as a topic which has already yielded different concepts. And these different concepts are at least stemming from three traditions. First one is mostly popular in Germany, in German research on leadership. Here, leadership dilemmas are considered as role-based conflicts, meaning that there are different expectations and demands which are with which leaders are confronted. Different expectations from different interest groups, and they result in several role conflicts, role contradictions. And this is called leadership dilemma. One of the beginners of these role-based consideration of leadership dilemma is Mintzberg, one of the classical management scholars, and Neuberger, who is still a German author, wrote about leadership dilemmas in terms of roles and role conflicts will be more relevant for our study. Quite a different concept on leadership dilemmas was provided by scholars dealing with ethics and leadership, with ethically rooted leadership dilemmas, saying that in terms of ethics, there are often situations in leadership where leaders cannot decide and cannot break some ethical rules. Ethical rules can produce contradictions which result at the end in this ethically dilemma or ethical dilemmatic decision. For example, one classical ethical dilemma is to decide in terms of organizational goals or to make a decision which would be better for employees, for them and their demands. Really very traditional way of illustrating this would be to decide to cut personnel costs and to fire employees, or in terms of reaching organizational goals, or to resist cutting plans and to say, no, we will stay in our old personnel constellation and we will not fire employees in order to provide employees with jobs. Very, very challenging, very complex situation in ethical terms, since every leader is responsible towards organization and organizational goals, at the same time towards employees and followers. And the last discussion, which is much more marginal and not so relevant for our research, is leadership dilemmas related to some leadership concepts. For example, charismatic leadership has been considered as inherently related to a dilemma between between the focusing of employees and their motivation and between the focusing on the leader itself. At the end, we have used in our study the first one, consideration of leadership dilemma, namely role-based consideration. It's also because Oswald Neuberger, a German author, using this concept was quite familiar to us, and we thought it would be very interesting to look at public sector organizations from this perspective. And in order to give you an impression regarding what kind of role conflicts are considered here, according to Neuberger, I just briefly have summarized some of these dilemmas. And Neuberger considers leadership dilemmas, as I said, as ambiguities and contradictions of roles in terms of expectations and demands towards leaders. And these contradictions can be related, on the one side, to treatment of subordinates as means, or treatment of subordinates as ends, as end in itself, namely not just treating subordinates as a commodity which can be fired and hired and so on, but much more as something very relevant for organization, as a human resource in direct sense of its term. Another example of dilemma as considered by Neuberger was looking at general rules of justice for all subordinates and dealing with all subordinates in a similar way, or look at special needs and abilities of a single employee. It's some way it's universal dealing with employees or individualized dealing with employees. Another dilemma would be regulation versus self-determination in terms of how many control is required in order to achieve the goals of the department, and how many self-determination and self-organization can be allowed to employees in order to achieve their tasks. And there are some more different dilemmas, but I think you have got some impression and idea what are dilemmas from the role-based perspective. It's about roles in terms of expectations, how leaders should behave, and these expectations are quite conflicting, contradicting, and there's no right way to to eschew this contradiction. There's no right solution for this dilemma. There's always a challenge. And when we look not only at the theory, but also at the empirical results and empirical research, we can state that on the side of leadership dilemmas in leadership research, main focus is on the immediate leadership relation in terms of interaction between leader and the employee. In the organizational context and institutional context, like the specificity of organization, is mainly ignored. And by the way, not only these dilemmas ignore these organizational contexts, at the same time, main empirical results on leadership dilemmas stems from business organizations, or from separated sectors of public sector, like educational, healthcare sector. There are also few research or few studies on political leadership and dilemmas as faced by presidents or mayors. Those we have here political leadership and consideration of their dilemmas. But until now, there are no studies dealing with public administration, with administration municipalities, and administrations and leadership in these administrations and their dilemmas. When we look at research on leadership in public sector organizations, they are mainly studies dealing with only one concept from the complete leadership theories. This transformational leadership is predominating really all the discussions on public sector leadership. And this predomination of transformation leadership is really quite a problem, since it makes the complete discussion very one-sided, and it should be criticized, and we try with our study to criticize it while looking at leadership dilemmas and complex situations of leadership in administrations, and looking at specific leadership contexts. So, okay, I am. Thank you. And at the end, our approach to leadership dilemmas, as we say, is contextually oriented approach. Since we do not use universal leadership dilemmas, but we look at the context of public administrations and try to figure out what kind of dilemmas emerge in these organizations, what kind of leadership dilemmas can be observed here, which are really challenging for leaders in administrations. And why we are doing this, we think, and this is the reason for this, that public sector organizations are quite specific, especially administrations in municipalities are really very specific, since on the one side there are several processes of modernization and debureaucratization which are taking place here, even in Lithuania, or even very acutely in Lithuania. At the same time, in municipalities, there are different new public management models which are implemented here. The new public management is actually an idea to transfer different concepts and measures from private sector to public sector without criticizing it. You can imagine when we transfer something from private sector to public sector, we can cause very different problems and, by the way, quite acute dilemmas for administrative leaders. And at the end, with our empirical study, we look at two transformational societies, Germany and Lithuania. Transformation in terms from the post-socialist societies, societies dealing with their communist heritage, which is still very relevant up to now. And maybe you can ask yourself why Germany is post-socialist society, since there are two Germanys, East Germany and West Germany, with West Germany being capitalist and East Germany being even now post-socialist and post-communist, and really very very helpful example of a transformational society. It means we have made our study in East Germany, in the eastern part of Germany, which suffers from quite similar modernization and debureaucratization processes like Lithuanian municipalities. So there are different similarities which allows for a comparison of leadership dilemmas between Germany, East Germany and Lithuania. As I said, we conducted an empirical study in an explorative way. It was a qualitative study in selected municipalities in Lithuania and Germany. As I said, it was a working group of researchers with Reinhard Lang and me being from Germany, and Rita Tolikienė and Diana Šapanienė represented Lithuania. And we have collected different interviews in these municipalities. Our aim was to make at least 2 interviews in one department of one municipality, one administrative department. And we tried to interview supervisor and his or her employee, at least one employee. In different cases, we have managed to interview several employees, and at the end, we have in Germany, where we made interviews in Saxony and Thuringia, altogether 11 interviews. In Lithuania, where interviews were made in municipalities of northern part of Lithuania, 10 interviews. So our complete empirical material is based on 21 interviews stemming from different countries, different municipalities. And to be honest, during the interviews, we didn't ask explicitly for leadership dilemmas, since leadership dilemmas quite complicated phenomena to analyze, to empirically approach. We have asked much more for conflicts, for challenges, and I think that this method approach is quite helpful, since dilemmas can be observed also in the narratives on these conflicts. Now, what are the results of our 21 interviews? The results are quite different, with differences between Germany and Lithuania, and I have selected just few of these dilemmas in order to illustrate what kind of dilemmas are really dominating the interviews as well as everyday working in these municipalities. First of the dilemmas, it is administrative versus political decision making. By the way, this dilemma was very acute in the interviews from Lithuania. What does it mean, dilemma of administrative versus political decision making? It means that leaders in administration or department supervisors, while taking their decisions, have to look at the same time at the political interest as expressed by political party representatives on the one side, and at the same time they have to follow administrative rules and regulations. So it's often really dilemmatic to decide what is much more relevant, the political interest or the administrative requirement. There are different, very, very interesting interview quotes, and I have chose just two of them, illustrating what is this about in the everyday work. One Lithuanian, I think, supervisor have said that we are responsible to the director of administration. But you shouldn't forget that you have to do with a municipality where the supreme body is a council, political council, consisting of representatives of political parties. In short, each political party represented in the council is involved into the life of the municipality. Hence, every issue requires a compromising between the direct supervisor, director of administration, and the political critics of the proposal. So every administrative decision has to deal with administrative requirements and political interest, political expectations. That's a true dilemma. And in Germany, there are also indications of this dilemma. So it's not only a Lithuanian symptom. A German employee explained, it is clear that bosses have to fight, but they have only limited chances to change that if, as I said, a big pressure comes from the Landratsamt, so-called rural district office. There are no rural district offices in Lithuania since there are only political city councils and then central decision-making in Vilnius. In Germany, there are councils in between cities and between Berlin, between federal decision-making. And these in-between political councils are also very powerful, and every administrative decision has to be compromised and negotiated with them. So it's just almost the same dilemma like in Lithuania in terms of conflicting expectancies and conflict of interest of administrative and political level. But in Lithuania, this dilemma is much more acute, much more relevant for every leader in administration, because in Lithuania there is a tradition to fire all leaders when the political parties and the council are changing. So there's really not only a theoretical dilemma, it's really a dilemma which has to do with existential needs of the supervisors in administration as well as employees. Another one dilemma, not so acute, not so, let me say, not so existentially relevant, is leadership dilemma between cooperative work versus individual responsibility. It has to do with decision making. It has to do with the idea that every leader has to consult his or her employees in order to prepare a decision. So there are many, many ideas provided by employees, by followers to the leader, but at the end, the leader has to make his or her decision alone. It's individual responsibility, since the leader signs all decisions. And it's really a dilemma between how much to let to participate employees in my own decision as leader. It's a, so to say, dilemma of participation in public administrations. And there are interesting quotes from Lithuania. One employee has said, it happens that our supervisor is not able to talk with us. then he makes decision alone. He just informs us afterwards. But we always take part in decision making since we are those who prepare decisions and propose. So we see from this quote that this leader deals with the dilemma in a very useful way for him or her, not explaining, not informing employees, just highlighting his or her individual responsibility. In Germany, I will skip the second Lithuanian quote. In Germany, the supervisor said, I know it. I know what I'm speaking about. And I say, and I have to sign it. I have to sign it. I'm individually responsible about it. So I have to deal with the issue, even if employees are preparing some ideas. So we see, it's really interesting. And just now, while I'm talking about this, I see that Lithuanian leaders as well as German leaders tend to solve this dilemma in terms of highlighting their individual responsibility and skipping or reducing participation of employees since they remain individually responsible. It's really interesting since it shows, it demonstrates participation of employees. It's really powerful motivation instrument, but at the same time, it's not so easy to implement this instrument in public administrations because every decision has to be responded individually by the leaders, not by employees. And the last one, dilemma I would like to explain to you or to talk with you about it would be the dilemma of general versus individual treatment of subordinates. How to treat employees in the same way or very individualized. And it's a dilemma which was stressed especially by the German leaders who said, yeah, actually, you are responsible as a leader for general treatment, for treatment of all employees in the same way. Also in terms of equity, social equity. But it's not so easy because employees are quite different. And there are some employees who are very responsible and they are very motivated, and there are also employees who are not so motivated. And as a leader, you tend to overburden those employees who are motivated and who achieve their goals, and too much more to ignore, not so much to challenge the remaining employees who are potentially not so motivated. And so in Germany, the supervisor, one supervisor said, this is ever a question, how far can I burden my coworkers with additional tasks, knowing that there's no one else to do it? Normally, I have to protect them since they have enough to do, but there is no another way who can do it. So I do not deal with employees in the same way, and I tend to overburden my good employees, my good followers with additional tasks. It does not affect all employees. It will have sometimes differed a bit. Some get information, then the others does not. The same supervisor, no, not the same supervisor. That was a man. The employee of the supervisor explained, yeah, the supervisor deals with his information in a different way. They are followers and employees who are more informed by him than another group of employees. And it remains a dilemma, how to deal with employees in the same way. And taking these three dilemmas together, we can see that there are some slight differences between the countries, with administrative versus political decision-making dilemma being much more acute in Lithuanian municipalities. It's really very prominent challenge for leaders in Lithuanian public administrations. Cooperative versus individual responsibility, is a dilemma which is characteristic for both countries, for both municipalities or municipalities from both countries. And the last one, dilemma of dealing with employees in a general or individualized way, is much more German issue. And for me, it's quite interesting to look at this result, since I think, yeah, in Germany, the topic of social justice, of social equality, is so relevant that German leaders in public administrations look at this as their everyday challenge. In Lithuania, treating employees in the same way or not is not so relevant, since it's only speculation, since the Lithuanian culture is not so justice-oriented. That's the findings from our empirical examination, and at the end, I can say it's interesting to look at this results, since they suppose public administrations and local governments are specific organizations which cause or which are prone to very specific leadership dilemma, with, for example, dilemma of administrative versus political decision making being very specific for this kind of organizations. At least no private sector organization has to deal with this dilemma in this acute way. So our primary assumption that context-specific consideration of leadership dilemma is useful and relevant or fruitful even seems to be supported here. And all of our broader context-specific approach becomes also some support from the results we have made. But at the same time, we have to take into account that our study is quite limited in method terms, because there's only small number of very diverse cases. There are different municipalities, and we have made different number of interviews in these municipalities. It would be better to have either only small municipalities or, for example, on large municipalities in order to compare. Now we have very heterogeneous empirical results, and we are not able to look at the size as a factor causing some different dilemmas. But it would be very interesting. It would be also very interesting and fruitful to deal in a more in-depth way with different municipalities, as well as with really these different cultural context of leadership dilemmas, since, as we got already an impression, there are cultural differences between Lithuania and Germany. And these cultural differences frame also the way how public administrations look at their tasks, at their jobs, and how public administrations and employees consider leadership, what is relevant, what's not relevant, and how they deal with dilemmas and contradictions. That is. Thank you very much for your attention and for your ideas, I hope.
Thank you, Professor. I would like to remind participants who are connecting us online that you have the possibility to give your questions online in the chat line. And now we are preparing our audience for questions. Maybe somebody already has any questions for our presenter. Still thinking. So if Professor will let me, I will be the first one giving you some questions. Thank you very much for your very interesting presentation, and your empirical research looks very important for our development of local government and leadership as a key issue for successful good governance in local self-government. I would like to ask, you named dilemmas which are very connected with paradoxes, as you mentioned in the beginning of your presentation. So my question would be, maybe you could identify paradoxes or causes which influence such dilemmas in Lithuania and in the East German?
Very, very good question. Thank you very much, Vita. What are the causes? Why these dilemmas emerge in these organizations? One of them, especially this political versus administrative dilemma, is caused by in Lithuanian as well as in German municipalities by the structure, this very specific structure of municipalities. In difference to any private organizations, municipalities are structured by these two levels. Political level on the one side, with city councils being a very relevant part of the municipality, and the administrative part with employees, leaders or supervisors. And these two layers, I would say, layers of parts are interlinked, but they are very different in terms of the way of employment contracts, in terms of their tasks, and because of these different interests, I think this dilemma of administrative versus political decision making is cannot be eschewed, cannot be avoided in municipalities. It's really structurally caused, so to say, because political parties are elected every 4 years, and administrative employees are actually employed with their contracts, which in an ideal way are not terminated, and they are completely different time considerations. They are completely different history references towards what was in their at the beginning of the city, of the municipality, and what is the vision, what is the future. And, actually, I think municipalities are really very interesting in terms of organizations, because they are two organizations in one, which have to cooperate, coordinate, negotiate with each other. And these dilemmas, like administrative and political dilemma, are inherently made by this double structure. One cause. What are more additional causes? I think it sounds like a critique towards Lithuanian system, but I think the way how the political council is made, what are the responsibilities and what are the tasks and what are the contractual relations of the politicians, communal politicians, are not really suitable in order to achieve the right decisions, because I think in Lithuania the members of the council are, let me say, it's only second job of them. They are not by contract responsible towards someone, and they are very driven by their particular interests which are not really interest towards publicly relevant achievements, but much more interest toward the companies or companies of their relatives. This dominance of particular interest, very practical interest, and there's no structure which could allow for a joint interest, for one idea what could be the future of the city. By the way, Cholet, very impressive and very sad example for this. To be honest, I'm not sure how the council members in Germany are made responsible to the city, but in my impression, communal politicians become their, let me say, they are full-time politicians. They are not businessmen together with political responsibility. And it's, to be honest, it's really relevant point in order to avoid interest conflicts and avoid very clear dilemmatic situations. But there are also different causes. There are causes which are rooted in our understandings, cultural understandings. What is the good way of leading? What is not a good or not just a way of leading? For example, participation of employees. It has made a very fashionable topic in every human resource management textbook. They're relevant to let employees to participate. But some cultural assumptions regarding leadership hinder this participation, since we expect that leaders will give employees an orientation and motivation and also feedback and so on. So leaders, not employees, are responsible at the end for decisions. And there are some clashes of cultural assumptions which cause also different dilemma.
Thank you, Professor. Maybe somebody from the audience would like to give questions. I see. Please, lecturer Vilma Tubutina.
Thank you. It was really very interesting, and looking at comparison through the dilemmas. So it's really useful to understand the causes and the these not better but challenging points that our young democracy and our young public administration system still face. So my question, or maybe more discussion point, is from other side when we talk about leadership in public administration. It's not just not communication.
Links.
Thank you. Links between political and administrative staff, or these people who present these both sides, but as well, it's bureaucratical face of administracy. So when we talk about politics, it looks or political leadership, it could be more like, more creative in some ways, because they could have some visions of the future. So in all understanding the political visions and through the programs should affect the administration or decisions in administration. But what we have in reality, and your dilemmas really in some points prove it, that in administration we have some, or maybe in all cases, we have this bureaucratical leadership that is more higher than political visions. So when these two points come in one, so the question is how those institutional leaders who really should represent some bureaucratical institution or bureaucratical culture, they couldn't be so creative in making decisions. So in the case of maybe Lithuania, or even in the case of public administration, so making leadership or providing some leadership in bureaucratical institution, sometimes it's a very big dilemma what that means. Should you follow bureaucratical culture, or should you really see the final point, the final this vision, not just what is better for the town or for the city, but the best for citizens, for those who elected leaders, political leaders, but those, administrative, bureaucratical leaders were appointed. So are they then, it's not necessary for them be involved in these vision of political leadership. So it's another dilemma between this political vision and this bureaucratical culture. Is it possible to merge them in one? So it's just for discussion. Thank you.
Very much. Really interesting question with a few differences which are really relevant and which also cause some dilemmas. Absolutely. The main point I would say, what is leadership in bureaucratic structures and what is leadership in political structures? With bureaucratic structures being very inflexible and limiting every new idea, and political structures allowing for visions and some relevant innovations. Yeah, I think indeed leadership is not the same. Leadership in administration is not the same as leadership in political level. And potentially it would be useful to differentiate between them and to be more realistically about opportunities leaders in both levels can use and can have in order to implement their ideas. And at the end, it could mean that political leaders or potential political leaders have to develop different capabilities than administrative leaders. It could be indeed, but I think at the end, the most relevant factor is indeed to remain open towards these restrictions and contradictions at the same time, and to try to navigate between these contradictions. And it's relevant and it's required by politicians as well as by administrative staff. Well, not only leaders are responsible for visions. By the way, citizens are also responsible for visions for their own future. And I would say, but as you asked at the beginning, leadership is a main factor of success. I think often we overestimate the impact of leadership, thinking there are some selected, very specific, very capable individuals who are leaders. I think, no, we are democracy, we are democratic societies with leadership being shared or distributed among different institutions, and by the way, among all of us. So not only appointed leaders in administration or elected leaders in the councils are responsible for leadership and for results, but also every one of us and every staff member. And, this is another topic, another issue, and another theory, by the way. Distributed theory is talking about this. But we have to become more concerned about our taken for granted assumptions regarding leadership. Leadership is not focused on one or two individuals. Leadership is a process where we all are participating in. And we have to look at restrictions. For example, individual responsibility of leaders remains one limitation of distribution of leadership, but nevertheless, all of you, me as well, have an opportunity to influence leadership processes and to participate in decisions, to require for participation. It's about democracy in leadership as well. Very unusual idea, but I think it's at a time now to criticize this assumption that leadership is a responsibility of a few individuals. It's not at all.
Irma, would you like to reflect?
One case from Šiauliai municipality,
Sure.
the same Šiauliai municipality, I think they are not very happy about this topic that we usually use them as a case, but it was some situation that really very modern, with very modern ideas, administrative staff. They propose the new management style, meaning meaning the management of the process, Sigma, whatever, or
Management objectives.
No, by the manage lean methodology,
Okay.
like lean methodology, Sigma methodology,
Oh my
and
God.
what happens? It's really very, I mean, effective way of managing of process, because it could help you to economize some money, time, and whatever. But what happens that these administrative or this bureaucratical idea wasn't accepted by politicals, and the idea was dead. So we still have management not thinking about the management or effective management of processes when you count, when you distribute processes and evaluate them. So that is like, as you said, it's really maybe shared leadership could help have more voices. But if the leadership concentrate, as you mentioned, in it's cultural, I think, differences. We really trust in our leaders too much. So that is citizenship, I think, some issue of citizenship and issue of young democracy in Lithuania, particularly in Chile, that was very all the time more social democratical. So yeah, thank you. It's just
Social democracy is a great tradition, political tradition. I think it's not so much about the concrete political orientation. It's potentially much more, really much more about our cultural assumptions. It's, to be honest, as a psychologist, I look at this from, say, the psychologist's perspective, and I think to require too much responsibility from leader is, it has to do with the diffusion of our personal responsibility, and to think leaders, not we, are responsible for relevant decisions. It's very useful, it's very easy, suitable, okay, but it's not an engaged way in decisions in leadership.
Dear colleagues, do you have more questions? You can ask in any language.
In any language, indeed, even in Chinese.
Maybe colleagues have some questions.
Maybe some impressions.
Yeah.
What kind of impression do you got from this discussion and presentation? What are your ideas about these topics? How many leading or leaders do you need?
There is a question following this discussion.
Great, you.
Hello, you were speaking about that we need to share leadership. My question would be, would it create like a house in society that would be no leaders?
Yeah, indeed, at the end, in terms of shared or distributed leadership, there would be no leader or no leaders in the usual way or in the usual term. That would be the vision, leaderless societies. Exactly. But it does not mean that it would be a chaotic society at all. We have to talk about the way how we organize decision making. And at the end, we can also think not about completely leaderless society, but for example, about rotation principles, becoming responsible for selected issues for a short period of time, for example. And it's, by the way, a very useful model of rotation also in sharing leadership in working groups, to become responsible, individually responsible for some selected issues. So we have to think about the leadership not as an individual responsibility, as I said, but as a process which can encompass and include many, many, many individuals. But to be honest, it would be, for me, it would be really ideal to work in a leaderless organization where everyone is taking part in decision making almost every day. Thank you very much for this very vision-oriented question.
Thank you for this question. Professor, could I ask one more question about what you mentioned in the beginning of your presentation about ethical issues of leadership? You mentioned that if we transfer some principles of business sector to public administration, we get additional dilemmas and paradoxes in leadership.
Yep.
Could you name some examples and to share your experience in this field?
There are many experiences, but they are not directly linked to a leadership dilemma. But this is main of the problems in the last 10 years, I would say, in public sector organizations, which increasingly become privatized, or not become privatized, but become much more managed by private or private sector oriented measures. For example, when there one of the measure or one of the way how to introduce new public management in public sector organizations is to introduce goal-oriented assessment of individuals, of employees, and to introduce goal or assessment-oriented wage system. And it depends on the goals which can be defined or not defined. And in the most cases, these goals become very clearly defined, but at the same time oriented towards income of organization and not so much towards, let me say, public interest or just quality of service, because the quality of service cannot measure so easily. So the employees are assessed according to the amount of clients or customers, but not according to the quality of the consultation, for example. And at the end, the quality of services is suffering very much. Or much more example, but it's not so much about new public management, it's rather about privatization tendencies. In Lithuania, just now, for example, their organization, Lietuvos Geležinkeliai, is really becomes very restructured towards three privately organized companies. And almost the same processes were also in Germany 15 years ago with the Deutsche Bahn, German Geležinkeliai. And what was the result? Before the privatization, the services were great, punctuality were great, the prices were not so high. After that, prices increased, services are really low, and the punctuality is really bad in Germany. Every journey with the Deutsche Bahn is some kind of adventure, because you cannot expect that you will get your next connection. It's really, really a problem. What is the main cause of this problem? After becoming privatized, this company have to look at the income and not so much at the quality. And the main interest groups are not not individual customers, but much more the financial interest groups. And it's really a catastrophic, a dramatic problem. And I'm asking myself why Lithuanian politicians are just making the same problems or making the same failures. It's really paradoxical. And but by the way, privatization or transferring private sector-oriented measures into the public sector has really it causes one conflict, because public sector organizations are mainly publicly responsible for their services and for the public interest, not for generating income. And it's the main conflict between the interest of public sector and private sector. So while experimenting with public sector, we really destroy very relevant services at the end. And it's, for me, it's really quite hard to understand why these experimentations are going on in different countries, especially in Eastern European countries, although there are many very sad experiences with this in different countries from Western Europe or even America.
Thank you, Professor. I can ask the audience if you have any more questions. If not, we can see that our participant from the University of Latvia, Inesa Bolina, has written something. And no, there is not a question, just thanks for you for your interesting presentation and the study. So we are very happy that we had some participants, I can see from Czech Republic, from Lithuania, Latvia, and even Italy. So thank you all colleagues for participation in this event. And of course, the biggest thanks for our presenter, Professor Irma Rybnikova, for her time for sharing with us ideas and insights on leadership. Even we are not leaders in the municipality. We are not mayors or directors of administration. I hope that in this room where we gather some students in public administration studies, maybe there are some future mayors, some future administrators. So we hope that this presentation and this lecture will help you to understand that sometimes sharing of leadership is not that thing. Sometimes we just have to deal with our citizens and to ask for their needs. So thank you once more for a very interesting presentation. Have a good day. And I would like just to remind for our participants that next week on the 22nd of March, we will have another Researchers Excellence Network event where we have a plenary session of the conference, the region, culture, society, and history. So please join us again, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much.